The scent of stale coffee and damp concrete was the perfume of Eleanor's life. It clung to the threadbare curtains of her small apartment, a constant reminder of the diner where she worked and the city that was slowly grinding her down. Every morning began with the same ritual, a quiet prayer of gratitude for her daughter, Lily, who slept soundly in the next room, and a silent plea for the strength to face another day under the heavy gaze of Mr. Sterling. He owned the diner, he owned the building, and in many ways, Eleanor felt he owned her, too. Her world was a fragile one, balanced on the edge of a knife. The rent was a chasm she barely leaped over each month, and food was a careful calculation of pennies and coupons. Yet, within the four peeling walls of their apartment, she had cultivated a small garden of hope for Lily. They read stories about magical kingdoms, drew pictures of suns that always smiled, and whispered secrets under a blanket fort built from worn-out sheets. In those moments, Eleanor wasn't a tired waitress with aching feet. She was a queen, a sorceress, a protector of the most precious treasure in the universe. Lily, at 6 years old, saw the world in vibrant, simple colors. Mommy was the sun, their apartment was their castle, and the growling motorcycles that sometimes parked across the street were sleeping dragons. She didn't understand the worry that etched fine lines around her mother's eyes, or the way her mother's smile sometimes felt brittle, like a leaf in autumn. She only knew the warmth of her mother's hand and the soft melody of her lullabies. The previous evening had been different. A storm had been brewing, not in the sky, but in the tight set of Mr. Sterling's jaw when he'd approached their table. He was a man polished to a high sheen, from his gleaming shoes to his perfectly coiffed silver hair. But beneath the expensive suit and cologne, there was something cold, something that made Eleanor's skin crawl. "Eleanor," he had said, his voice a low purr that didn't match the iciness in his eyes. "I require your assistance for a private catering event at my home this evening. A client emergency. You will be compensated generously." It was not a request. It was a command wrapped in the thinnest veil of courtesy. Panic flared in Eleanor's chest. "Mr. Sterling, I can't. My daughter, Lily, she'll be alone." His smile didn't waver. "Nonsense. She's a big girl, is she not? The neighbors can look in. This is important, Eleanor. Your continued tenancy here is important, I trust." The threat was unspoken, but as clear as the polished crystal of his watch. Her job, her home, it was all in his hands. Defeated, she had nodded, her heart a leaden weight. Before she left, she had knelt before Lily, her hands cupping her daughter's face. "Mommy has to go help Mr. Sterling for a little while, my love. It's very late work. You be a brave girl, lock the door behind me, and I'll be back before you wake up. I promise." She had tucked her into bed, read 2 stories instead of 1, and kissed her forehead until Lily's breathing deepened into the gentle rhythm of sleep. Her own heart felt like it was being torn in two as she quietly locked the door from the outside, praying this one compromise would be enough to keep their fragile world intact. But morning had come, and Eleanor had not. The gray light of dawn crept through the window, painting stripes across Lily's small bed. She blinked awake, a familiar sense of morning expectation in her chest. "Mommy," she called out, her voice small in the silent apartment. The only answer was the distant groan of city traffic. She slid off the bed, her bare feet pattering on the cold linoleum floor. The apartment was empty. The blanket on her mother's bed was still perfectly smooth. A knot of fear, cold and tight, formed in her stomach. Mommy always came back. Mommy always kept her promises. She checked the clock, a big, round-faced thing her mother had taught her to read. The little hand was on the 7. This was breakfast time. This was cartoon time. This was not alone time. "Mommy," she called again, louder this time, a tremor in her voice. The silence that answered was vast and terrifying. Panic began to bubble up, hot and prickly, behind her eyes. She ran to the front door and twisted the knob, but it wouldn't budge. Mommy had locked it from the outside. A sob escaped her lips. She was trapped. She was alone. Her mother's words from the night before echoed in her head. "I'll be back before you wake up. I promise." The promise was broken. Everything was wrong. Lily's small world had suddenly tilted on its axis, throwing her into a terrifying new reality. She looked out the window, down at the street below. People walked by like ants, unaware of the little girl whose universe was crumbling. And then she saw them. The sleeping dragons. A row of motorcycles, gleaming chrome and dark leather, were parked in front of the cafe across the street. Around them sat a group of men who looked like they were carved from rock and steel, their jackets adorned with patches that looked like shields. They were big and scary, the kind of men her mother told her to be wary of. But in that moment, they were the only thing that felt real in a world that had become a nightmare. A desperate, childlike logic took hold. They were big. They were strong. Big, strong people were supposed to help. With a surge of adrenaline fueled by fear, Lily dragged a kitchen chair to the door. Climbing on it to reach the deadbolt she knew her mother sometimes left unlocked from the inside. It turned with a heavy click. The door swung open. She didn't hesitate. She ran. Down the grimy hallway, past the closed doors of her neighbors, and down 3 flights of echoing concrete stairs. The cool morning air hit her face as she burst onto the sidewalk. Her bare feet slapped against the pavement, but she didn't feel the cold. Her entire being was focused on one thing: reaching the dragons. The men of the Iron Sentinels Motorcycle Club were enjoying a rare moment of peace. The coffee was hot, the morning air was crisp, and the usual rumble of their lives had subsided into a low hum. Their leader, a mountain of a man known only as Bear, sipped his black coffee, his eyes scanning the street with a practiced, calm vigilance. He had a beard that looked like it had been spun from iron filings and a face that was a roadmap of hard-won battles. He saw the small girl before anyone else did. A flash of pink pajamas against the gray backdrop of the city. He watched her run from the tenement building, her little face a mask of pure terror. She wasn't running aimlessly. She was running directly toward them. His protective instincts, honed over decades of leading his club, flared to life. Something was terribly wrong. Lily didn't slow down until she was standing in the shadow of the largest man. She reached out a trembling hand and tugged on the sleeve of his thick leather jacket. The patch on his arm was a snarling wolf's head. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking with sobs. "Please, mister. My mommy didn't come back last night." Bear looked down at the tiny, tear-streaked face. In her eyes, he saw a reflection of every innocent soul his club had sworn to protect. The chatter among his men ceased instantly. Every eye was on the little girl. Bear knelt, a difficult task for a man his size, bringing himself down to her level. His voice, normally a low growl that could silence a bar fight, was softer than he knew it could be. "What's your name, little one?" "Lily," she choked out. "My mommy's name is Eleanor. She promised she'd be home." "Okay, Lily," Bear said, his gaze steady and reassuring. "We're going to help you find your mommy." He motioned to one of his men, a wiry biker called Cypher. "Get her some juice." And a blanket, another sentinel, Doc, who had been a medic in the army, stepped forward, his eyes already performing a gentle assessment of the child. She wasn't physically hurt, just terrified. A protective circle formed around her, a quiet, instinctive barrier of leather and muscle separating her from the rest of the world. Just as Cypher returned with a juice box and wrapped a warm club blanket around Lily's shivering shoulders, a sleek black sedan screeched to a halt at the curb. The door flew open and Mr. Sterling emerged, his face a thundercloud of fury. He saw Lily surrounded by the bikers, and his expression twisted into one of pure contempt. He strode toward them, his expensive shoes clicking aggressively on the pavement. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice sharp and arrogant. "Get away from her. You filth, get your hands off that child." He didn't look at Lily. He looked at the bikers as if they were vermin he'd found in his pristine home. Bear rose slowly to his full, intimidating height. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "The little girl came to us for help. She's scared. Her mother, Eleanor, is missing. Do you happen to know where she is, Mr. Sterling?" The use of his name was deliberate, a signal that they knew who he was. Sterling scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Eleanor? That woman is completely irresponsible. Probably ran off with some new boyfriend. Now give me the child. I'm her landlord. I'm responsible for her." He lunged forward, his hand outstretched to grab Lily's arm. He never made it. Bear's arm shot out, not to strike, but to block. It was like hitting a wall of solid oak. 2 other sentinels stepped forward, flanking Bear, their presence an immovable promise of consequence. They didn't speak, they didn't threaten. They just stood there, a silent, unbreachable fortress around the little girl sipping her juice. I don't think so, Bear said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low temperature. The child stays with us until we find her mother. He gave a slight nod to Cypher, who had already discreetly angled his phone, its camera recording Sterling's increasingly agitated state. Sterling's face flushed with rage. The audacity of these thugs defying him was incomprehensible. You have no right. I'll call the police. I'll have all of you arrested for kidnapping. Please do, Bear replied, his calmness a stark contrast to Sterling's hysteria. We'll wait. In fact, we insist. He pulled out his own phone and dialed a number. He spoke in a low voice, but the words were clear. Patch, I need eyes on Sterling's residence. The mansion on Hillcrest. Now. And find out everything you can about a private catering event there last night. Something's not right. The confrontation hung in the air, thick and tense. Sterling, for the first time, seemed to realize he was not dealing with disorganized street thugs. The calm efficiency, the quiet commands, the unwavering way they stood their ground. It spoke of an organization far more disciplined than he had anticipated. His blustering confidence began to fray at the edges, replaced by a flicker of genuine fear. The wail of sirens cut through the morning air a few minutes later. 2 police cruisers pulled up, and officers stepped out, their hands resting cautiously on their belts as they took in the scene. A frantic man in a business suit, a terrified child, and a dozen formidable-looking bikers. What's the situation here? The senior officer asked, his eyes moving from Bear to Sterling. Sterling immediately launched into a tirade. Thank goodness you're here, officer. These brutes have taken my tenant's child. They're threatening me. I want them arrested. The officer turned to Bear, his expression skeptical but professional. Bear remained perfectly still. Officer, my name is Bear. I'm the president of the Iron Sentinels. This little girl, Lily, ran to us for help not 10 minutes ago. She said her mother, Eleanor, who works for this man, never came home last night. Mr. Sterling here seems more concerned with us than with the whereabouts of a missing single mother. He then nodded to Cypher. We also have a video of Mr. Sterling's behavior since he arrived, including his attempt to forcibly grab the child. Cypher held up his phone. The officer's eyes narrowed. The dynamics of the situation had just shifted dramatically. My men are concerned, Bear continued, his voice a low, steady rumble of authority. Eleanor was apparently required to work a private catering event at Mr. Sterling's mansion last night. We find it strange that he would show up here, yelling about our presence, rather than being at home, perhaps helping you search for his missing employee. Every word was a carefully placed stone, building a wall of suspicion around Sterling. The landlord's face had gone pale. The veins on his neck stood out as he sputtered. This is absurd. I am a respected member of this community. They are criminals. Sir, please calm down, the officer said to Sterling, before turning back to Bear. A missing person is a serious matter. We'll need to send a unit to the mother's apartment and to Mr. Sterling's residence to ask some questions. We'd appreciate that, Bear said. As the officers began to separate the parties, Bear's phone buzzed. He glanced at the text message from his man, Patch. His expression, already grim, hardened into granite. He looked up, his eyes locking onto Sterling's with an intensity that made the other man flinch. Officer, Bear said, his voice cutting through the noise. You might want to upgrade your visit to Mr. Sterling's residence to a welfare check with a search warrant. My associate, who is currently outside the property, reports hearing a faint sound. It sounds like someone is banging on a metal door. From inside the basement, everything stopped. The air crackled with a new, horrifying tension. Sterling's face, already pale, turned a ghastly shade of white. He took an involuntary step backward, his mask of respectability shattering like cheap glass. That's a lie. A desperate lie from a common criminal, he shrieked, his voice pitching high with panic. But it was too late. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it was watered by Sterling's own panicked reaction. The senior officer spoke into his radio, his voice urgent and firm. Dispatch, I need a unit at 142, Hillcrest Drive immediately. Possible unlawful imprisonment. The homeowner is on scene with me. Consider him a person of interest. The fallout was swift and devastating. While one team of officers took a distraught Sterling into custody for questioning, another sped to his mansion on the hill. The Iron Sentinels waited, a silent, patient phalanx on the sidewalk. They kept Lily cocooned in their circle, shielding her from the flashing lights and the ugly reality unfolding around her. Doc kept her distracted, making funny faces and telling her a story about a brave little wolf cub, while the others stood guard, their faces unreadable but their purpose clear. An hour later, an ambulance, its lights flashing but sirens silent, pulled away from Sterling's mansion. A female officer approached Bear, her expression a mixture of gratitude and grim respect. "You were right," she said quietly. "We found her. Eleanor." He had her locked in a wine cellar. She said he made advances, and when she refused him, he flew into a rage and locked her in. He told her he'd make sure she and her daughter were out on the street by morning. A wave of collective relief washed through the bikers, followed by a cold, controlled fury. Bear just nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "Is she all right?" "She's dehydrated and shaken, but she'll be okay. She's on her way to the hospital to get checked out." All she could talk about was her daughter. The officer looked over at Lily, who had fallen asleep in Doc's arms, the juice box still clutched in her hand. "She's a brave little girl. You guys, you did a good thing here today." The compliment was acknowledged with a simple, curt nod. For the Sentinels, it wasn't about praise. It was about the code. They had seen an innocent in trouble, and they had acted. It was as simple and as fundamental as the rumble of their engines. The unmasking of Mr. Sterling sent shockwaves through the community. The respected businessman was revealed to be a predator who used his wealth and power to exploit and abuse those dependent on him. The investigation, spurred by the bikers' intervention, uncovered a pattern of harassment and intimidation against other tenants and employees. His empire, built on fear, crumbled into dust. But the Iron Sentinel's job was not done. When Eleanor was released from the hospital, they were there. They didn't just offer words of comfort, they offered a plan. They told her she would never have to set foot in that apartment again. While she was recovering, they had packed every one of her and Lily's belongings, moving them into a new, clean, and safe apartment in a different part of town. The first 2 months' rent was already paid. Eleanor wept, overwhelmed by a kindness so profound and unexpected it felt like a dream. These men, who looked so intimidating, had become her saviors. They had listened to her daughter when no one else would have. They had stood up to a powerful man when she had been too afraid. They hadn't just rescued her. They had given her back her freedom. The support didn't stop there. Bear knew the owner of a popular family restaurant, a man who valued character over credentials. Eleanor was given a job as a hostess, with a fair wage and respectful colleagues. The club set up a small fund for Lily, ensuring she would have everything she needed for school. They became a quiet, constant presence in their lives, a group of unlikely, leather-clad uncles who would show up with groceries, fix a leaky faucet, or just sit on the porch, a silent promise that no one would ever harm them again. They had become family. A year passed. The gray pallor of fear had been replaced by the warm glow of security in Eleanor's life. She was no longer just surviving. She was thriving. Her quiet competence at the restaurant had earned her a promotion to assistant manager. Laughter came easily to her now, and her smile was genuine, reaching all the way to her eyes. Their new apartment was filled not with the scent of stale coffee, but with the aroma of baking cookies and the sound of Lily's happy chatter. One crisp autumn afternoon, Eleanor was leaving work when she saw a young woman sitting on a bus bench, juggling a crying baby and 2 overstuffed grocery bags. One of the bags tipped, sending a cascade of apples rolling across the sidewalk. The woman let out a cry of frustration, her shoulders slumping in defeat. A year ago, Eleanor might have walked by, too consumed by her own struggles to notice another's. But she was different now. She walked over, a kind smile on her face. "It looks like you could use an extra pair of hands," she said warmly. She helped the young mother gather the apples, then offered to drive her and her groceries home. As she drove, listening to the young woman's story of struggle and exhaustion, Eleanor saw a reflection of her former self. But now, she was in a position to help. She gave the woman her number, telling her about job openings at the restaurant and a local support group for single mothers. She paid it forward, passing on the same lifeline of kindness that had been extended to her. Later that evening, as she tucked Lily into bed, her daughter looked up at her. "Mommy," she said, "do you remember the dragon men?" Eleanor smiled, smoothing Lily's hair back from her forehead. "I do, sweetheart. I remember them every day. They were like knights, Lily said, her eyes growing heavy with sleep. Like in the stories. Yes, my love, Eleanor whispered, her heart full. They were exactly like knights. She had learned a profound lesson that day a year ago. She learned that monsters often wore expensive suits and charming smiles, using their power to cast long, dark shadows. And she learned that sometimes, the most valiant angels didn't have wings. Sometimes, they had tattoos and scars. Sometimes, they wore leather and rode motorcycles, their engines rumbling like the sound of distant, protective thunder. Far away, on a long, open highway, a line of motorcycles rode into the setting sun. The iron sentinels were on the move, a brotherhood bound by a silent code. They sought no thanks and expected no reward. They were simply the guardians on the wall, the quiet protectors of the forgotten and the afraid, their chrome glinting like the last, defiant light against the encroaching darkness.